Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind carried the sharp scent of pine and smoke as the deal was made behind a storage barn outside the small town of Casper. "She ain't worth more than a mule and 2 sacks of flour," growled Sienna Fletcher, thick hands folded across his chest. Sienna Fletcher stood 10 feet away, hands tied in front, wrists red and raw from the course rope. She did not cry. She had done that the night before when her brother-in-law told her what was coming. Her husband, Elias, had been dead 3 months, trampled under his own frightened horse, and Sienna had made it clear she was a burden now. A mouth to feed. A body to trade. The man they were speaking to was thick around the middle with a greasy hat and a stink of tobacco. He spat and looked her over like she was a cow up for auction. "She cook better than my first wife," Sienna said. The man nodded slowly. "Fine mule flour and a tin of coffee." Sienna's mouth went dry. She could barely breathe. Her heart kicked like a wild thing inside her chest. She thought of running, but her legs were shaking and there was nowhere to go. Her in-laws had burned her letters, sold her wedding dress, and told her she'd never see her family again. There was only this, a trade in the dirt behind a barn, her life exchanged for basic goods. "Do not touch me," she said, voice hoarse but firm. The man just laughed. "You won't be saying that once we're on the trail, sweetheart." Then a voice cut through the tension, low, even, but sharp enough to split the air. "That is not your woman to trade." All 3 men turned. A tall cowboy sat on a chestnut mare a few yards off, reins loose in one hand, the other resting over the butt of a holstered Colt. He had sun-browned skin, a jaw dark with stubble, and eyes like storm clouds. He did not raise his voice again. He did not need to. Sienna stepped forward. "Listen here, stranger, this ain't your business." The cowboy slid off the horse and walked forward, slow and calm, like he had seen worse than this and would see worse again. "The hell it ain't." Sienna stared at him. He was younger than Sienna, maybe 28, maybe 30. Dust clung to his boots and the edges of his coat, but he was steady, grounded. She had never seen him before. The buyer backed away, muttering, "I do not want trouble." Quinn Garrow, the cowboy, stopped in front of Sienna and looked at her hands. "Did they tie you?" She nodded. "You want to go with him?" he asked, motioning toward the man who was now climbing onto his wagon. "No," she whispered. Quinn looked at Sienna. "Then you are letting her go?" "She is my brother's wife. She belongs to no one," Quinn said, cold and certain. "You want to argue, we can do that, but it will not end the way you think." Sienna's hand twitched near his belt, but Quinn did not flinch. Instead, he drew the knife from his boot and stepped forward. Without breaking eye contact, he cut the rope from Sienna's wrists. When she gasped and rubbed her raw skin, Quinn gently took her arm. "You all right?" "I think so," she said. "You come with me now, if that is what you want." Her breath caught. She looked back at Sienna, who sneered and spit in the dirt, then at the stranger who had stepped out of nowhere and stopped the trade like it was nothing. "Yes," she said. "I want to go with you." They rode out without another word. By nightfall, they had made camp near a creek south of Casper. The trees whispered overhead and the fire snapped quietly. Sienna sat wrapped in Quinn's spare blanket, hands still trembling. He cooked beans and cornbread over the fire. She watched him work, calm hands, sure movements. He handed her a tin plate without speaking first. "You did not have to help me," she said. He looked up. "I could not ride past that, not and sleep again." She chewed slowly, the food warm in her chest. "Why were you in Casper?" "Dropped off cattle." Was headed toward Cheyenne, then saw something that did not sit right. She studied him in the firelight. His jaw was strong, nose slightly crooked like it had been broken once. He had the look of someone who had done hard things but never let them make him cruel. "You got family?" he asked. "No," she said quietly. "My husband died in June." His people blamed me, said I brought bad luck. They never wanted me, not really. Quinn nodded once. You are not bad luck. She blinked fast, fighting tears. You do not even know me. He met her eyes. I know enough. She did not sleep much that night, but when she did, she dreamed of quiet horses and a hand reaching for hers. They kept riding south. At first, Sienna rode behind Quinn, arms around his middle, face pressed to his back. By the third day, he bought her a small Appaloosa mare from a rancher he knew. She cried when he handed her the reins. I do not have anything to give you, she said. I did not ask for anything, he replied. They traveled slow not because they had to, but because Quinn took the time. He stopped when she looked tired. He made her laugh once, just barely, when he tried to cook a rabbit and burned it black. She started to tell him stories from her girlhood in Nebraska before she married Elias. He listened like every word mattered. And he told her things, too, about the brother he lost to fever, about the war he had been too young to join, and about the cabin he had built years back in the foothills of the Bighorns. It is small, he said, but it has a good stove, and quiet. Sounds like peace, she said. Quinn looked at her, then really looked, and something shifted in his eyes. It could be. By the 10th day, they reached the cabin. It stood in a clearing rimmed with pines, smoke rising steady from the chimney. There was a corral beside it, a root cellar dug near the back, and a porch that creaked under their boots. It is yours, Sienna asked. Ours if you want it, Quinn said softly. She turned to him, heart pounding. You do not know what you are saying. I do. He stepped closer. I know you are strong, even after everything. I know you are worth more than any man ever gave you credit for, and I know I want you here, with me. She stared up at him, breath catching. I do not know how to be someone's again. Then do not be someone's, he said. Be yours. And let me earn a place beside you. Her hands found his rough, warm, steady. She felt her knees go weak, but not from fear. Quinn, she whispered. He kissed her, then soft at first, like a question. She answered with her whole heart, and for the first time in a long time, Sienna felt safe. Safe, and maybe even loved. Sienna stood in the doorway of the cabin, one hand on the frame, watching as Quinn knelt by the woodpile stacking the last of the split logs. The late afternoon sun filtered through the pines, catching in his hair and turning the dust on his shoulders to gold. Inside, the cabin was rough-hewn but clean. A braided rug lay beside the narrow bed, and a kettle simmered lightly on the stove. She'd swept the place that morning after Quinn had gone out to check the snares. Her fingers had traced the edge of the hand-carved table, the worn corners of the rocker by the hearth. She hadn't asked who built it. She already knew. Quinn stood and wiped his hands on his trousers, catching her gaze. You warm enough with that stove going? She nodded. It's better than I've had in a long time. He walked up the porch steps and took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. I'll get that shutter fixed before the next rain. Looks like it's catching wind. How long have you lived here? 4 years, give or take. Built it myself after working ranches near Laramie. I needed a place that stayed when everything else moved. She stepped aside so he could come in, the familiar silence settling between them like an old quilt. It wasn't uncomfortable, just full of things not yet said. Did you always want to live out here? She asked, folding her arms. I wanted quiet. I wanted to work with my hands and sleep without hearing someone else's boots outside my door. That's not the same as wanting to be alone. She studied his face, the way his eyes lingered on hers. You were waiting for someone. Maybe I didn't know I was, he said, voice low. But I knew I wasn't meant to fill this place with emptiness. Sienna looked at the small shelf above the stove lined with tin cups and a single worn book. It's a good place. It could be better if it had more than just me in it. She turned to face him fully. I don't know how to live like this yet. I've spent so long being told what I owe. You don't owe me anything. Not for the horse, not for the roof. You're here because I wanted you safe. Anything more than that's got to come from you." He didn't reach for her, didn't close the space. He let the words sit. She felt the weight of them settle deep in her chest. "I don't have anything to offer," she said. "No dowry, no good name. Just what's left after everything else was taken." "I'm not after a name," he said. "Or what you used to be. I see you now, and I like what I see." Her throat tightened, not from sadness, but from the strange comfort of being seen without being measured. That night, while the wind whispered against the walls, she lay on the small cot Quinn had set up for her near the fire. He slept on the bed across the room, his breathing steady. The warmth of the stove spread through the cabin, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she had to keep one eye open. In the morning, she rose early, pulled her shawl tight, and stepped outside. Quinn was already by the corral, checking the mare's hoof. He looked over when he heard the door. "You sleep all right?" he asked. She walked toward him, boots crunching on frost-hardened dirt. "I did." Quinn stood, brushing off his hands. "There's a family east of here, the Dunns, older couple. They keep bees and trade honey for eggs or fresh butter. I was thinking we could ride out that way tomorrow. You might like to see what neighbors I've got." "You mean what neighbors we might have," she said softly. He blinked, then smiled, slow and without hesitation. "That's what I meant." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her wedding ring, the one she'd stopped wearing after Elias died. The gold had dulled, the band slightly bent. "I didn't bring much," she said, "but I kept this. I don't wear it anymore. I don't want to forget, but I don't want to carry it like a weight either." He nodded. "You don't have to explain." Sienna looked out at the trees, their tall silhouettes swaying. "I think I'd like to plant something in spring, potatoes maybe, or squash. Something that takes root and stays." "I'll help you dig the beds," Quinn said. She stepped closer to him, heart steady. "I'd like that." They didn't need anything else said. The work ahead was clear. There would be fences to mend, food to preserve, seasons to watch. But in that moment, all she saw was the promise of mornings like this, and a man who never once looked away when she spoke. The frost held late that spring, clinging to the creek banks and hardening the earth beneath Quinn's boots as he laid out fence posts with quiet precision. Sienna stood farther up the slope, measuring the rise of sun against the tree line, a canvas sack draped over one shoulder. Inside were seed potatoes, scabbed and sprouting, gathered from the Dunn's root cellar in trade for her stitching work. She knelt and began cutting shallow furrows with a sharpened branch. The soil was stubborn, still cold a few inches down, but she worked without complaint. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, hands dirt-streaked and steady. Quinn glanced over now and again, but he didn't interrupt. They'd grown into a rhythm, chores divided by instinct rather than assignment. He knew she'd be at the fire by dawn, and she knew he'd have the horses fed without needing to ask. By midday, they met beneath the lean-to, where a thin strip of shade offered rest. Sienna poured water from a gourd into a clay cup and handed it to him. "Dunn woman said to bury the eyes facing up," she said. "Said it helps them break the soil faster come June." He drank and passed the cup back. "I always planted by feel. Never thought about the eyes." "She said it matters," Sienna said, her tone light but sure. "Said everything wants to find the light, even a potato." Quinn watched her tie her braid back with a strip of cloth. "You believe that?" "I want to." They sat in silence a while, the kind that didn't press for words. Then Sienna shifted, brushing dirt from her skirt, gaze fixed on the slope. "When I was 15, my aunt told me I'd marry a banker's son in Kearney. She said I had the hands for piano and the face for Sunday dinners. I told her I wanted to teach school. She laughed like I'd said I meant to fly." Quinn leaned back on his elbows. "What happened to the banker's son?" He married someone else. Someone who didn't have ideas. He didn't ask what happened after that. He didn't need to. She looked at him then, and the corners of her mouth lifted not in mirth, but in something gentler, more private. "That roof needs shingling," she said, standing. "And I don't like climbing." "I'll take the ladder up tomorrow," he said. "You hold it steady." She nodded, brushing her palms together. "I'll make biscuits tonight, with lard, not butter." "I trust your biscuits," he said. "You haven't tasted them yet." "I trust you anyway." That evening, the scent of flour and rendered fat hung warm in the air. The biscuits browned in a cast iron pan, crisp along the edges. Sienna stood barefoot on the plank floor, sleeves dusted in white, her face flushed from the stove. Quinn entered with a small bundle wrapped in cloth and held it out. She took it, eyebrows lifting when she unfolded the fabric to find a spool of blue thread and a handful of bone buttons. "Mrs. Dunn sent them," he said. "Said you might mend that blouse with the torn cuff." Sienna held the spool in her palm, thumb brushing over it. "She didn't have to. She wanted to. Said she liked your stitching better than her own." Sienna looked up. "I never thought I'd be useful to someone again." He moved closer, slow and deliberate, until he stood with only the stove's heat between them. "You're not just useful," he said. "You make this place feel like it's more than just mine now." She met his eyes, searching. Then, for the first time since they'd met, she reached out, not in fear, not in gratitude, but with intention. Her fingers rested against his chest, just above his heart. "I don't know what kind of life I'll have here yet," she said, "but I want to find out." He covered her hand with his. "Then we'll find out together." That night, the shutters rattled from a passing wind and the fire burned low. Sienna lay in the bed now, not the cot, her head on the same pillow as his, breath rising steady beside him. Outside, the frost finally began to loosen its grip, and the soil softened beneath the weight of planted things. On the first true warm day of May, Sienna stood barefoot in the creek behind the cabin, skirts lifted to her knees, washing a shirt of Quinn's against a smooth stone. The water was still cold, but the sun on her shoulders softened the bite. A crow called once from the trees, then silence returned thick and clean as linen on a line. Quinn was down the hill, repairing the shed roof with a neighbor named Harlan who had stopped by with a wagon full of cedar shingles and a jug of cider. Sienna had offered them bread before sending them off with a nod, and now she worked alone, sleeves damp, hands red from the water. The shirt she held had a small tear under the arm, not from work, but from where Quinn had caught it on the corner of the barn door while chasing a runaway hen that had slipped out the morning before. He'd cursed low under his breath, then laughed when she'd offered him a basket like it was a cavalry mission. She wrung the shirt out gently, listening to the water drip back into the current. Her world had grown quiet, but not small. Each task had weight now, each movement a kind of grace she hadn't known she'd been missing. A rustle in the brush behind her made her turn, but it was only the mare, grazing near the edge of the trees. Sienna watched the animal for a moment, then climbed the bank slowly, carrying the damp bundle across her arms. Inside the cabin, she hung the shirt beside the fire, adjusting the line so it wouldn't sag. The hearth still held a few glowing coals from breakfast, and the smell of ash and soap clung to the air. She didn't hear the wagon return until the wheel crunched dry pine needles just beyond the porch. Harlan stayed seated while Quinn stepped down, wiping sweat from his brow with a kerchief. "You've got pitch in your hair," Sienna said from the doorway. Quinn glanced upward, then shrugged. "Harlan's got a heavy hand with tar. Roof's mended, though. No more leaks come summer storms." Harlan raised the jug in farewell and snapped the reins. As the wagon rolled off, Quinn climbed the steps and leaned against the post. "She bring her colt down yet?" he he asked, nodding toward the mare, still up on the ridge. I think she likes the quiet up there more. Quinn scratched at his jaw. We could clear more of that slope soon. Make room for whatever she's got coming. Sienna leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. You always plan ahead like that. Not always, he said. But I learned slow's better than sorry. She tilted her head. What changed it for you? He took a long breath, eyes on the ridge. My brother Jack once bought a team of unbroke Mustangs. Thought he could train them in a week. Took a kick to the ribs and near lost a lung. After that, I figured there's no shame in taking time. Sienna stepped forward, voice quiet. You think I'm slow? I think you're careful, he said. There's a difference. She reached out, brushing a flake of tar from his collar. Her hand lingered a second longer than necessary, and she didn't pull away when his fingers found hers. I've been thinking, she said. About the land behind the barn. There's a slope that catches sun early. I could try growing beans there, maybe tomatoes if the frost don't come back too soon. You'd tend it yourself, with help, she said. If you're offering, he nodded. I'm offering. They stood like that a while, hands joined, the soft wind threading through the trees. Then Sienna looked up at him, not searching this time, but certain. I don't want a house I'm only half settled in, she said. I want to know this is mine too, not just the walls, but what we build inside them. You already do, Quinn said. But if you need it said plain, I want a life with you that lasts. I never meant to rush you. I just wanted to be the kind of man you could choose. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned in and kissed him steady, without fear, without hesitation. The fire behind them popped once, and outside the mare lifted her head and turned toward the cabin. When they parted, Sienna rested her forehead against his. We've got work to do, she said. Quinn smiled. Then let's get to it. By June, the days lengthened into slow gold, and the land around the cabin filled with quiet labor. The bean plants had taken root in hard-won soil behind the barn, and Sienna had started tying them to sticks Quinn had cut from the willows near the creek. The tomatoes, coaxed from seed in a wooden box by the window, now nestled in their own plot, small and stubborn against the sun. One morning, while Sienna was gathering eggs, she heard Quinn talking to someone out near the shed. She stepped out into the light, wiping her hands on her apron. A wiry man stood beside Quinn's horse, hat in hand, one leg stiff as though it had mended wrong. He wore a battered coat despite the warmth and looked to be carrying more road dust than coin. This is Roy Thatcher, Quinn said. He was with me in Laramie years back. Helped build the post office roof when we had that storm. Sienna nodded politely. You hungry? Roy shifted, glancing at Quinn, then back at her. Ma'am, I wouldn't turn it down. She brought out bread and a jar of pickled beets, and they sat beneath the ash tree where the shade had settled thick. Roy ate without hurry, though his eyes kept drifting to the line of fence Quinn had been mending. I was headed north, Roy said after a time. But that gelding of mine gave out just past the cottonwoods. Thought I might stop a day or two, lend a hand until I can trade for a ride. You can stay in the loft, Quinn said. We'll find something that needs doing. Later, after Roy had gone to fetch water from the creek, Sienna stood with Quinn near the woodpile. You trust him. I know his name, Quinn said. And I know when a man's hungry but not desperate. She nodded, brushing sawdust from her skirt. If he's honest, he can stay. We could use another set of hands through haying. For the rest of that week, Roy worked without complaint. He sharpened tools, patched a loose board beneath the porch, and took to sleeping with his saddle rolled beneath his head. He never asked questions, never lingered too long near Sienna, and never touched a thing that wasn't his. One evening, as the three of them sat watching the sun fold down over the trees, Roy asked Sienna, You come from out east? She nodded once. Near the Platte River, Roy chewed a piece of grass. Funny, you don't carry it in your voice. Sienna glanced over at Quinn, who watched her with an almost imperceptible softness. That part's been worn off, she said. Roy didn't press. He stood soon after and wandered toward the spring, giving them space. Quinn leaned back against the porch post, his hand brushing hers where it rested on the step. I've been thinking, he said, about something I ought to ask, but I wanted to wait until it didn't feel like I was saving you from something. Sienna turned to him. What is it? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a hinged tin, dark with wear. Inside was a ring, plain silver, smoothed by time, the kind a man might trade for a pair of oxen and still call a treasure. My mother gave it to my father when they first settled in the territory, before there was even a town near here. She wore it after he passed. Said it reminded her what they built. Sienna looked down at it, then back at him. I don't need you to say yes tonight, Quinn said, but I want to build something that lasts too, and I want it with you. She didn't speak at once. She just took the ring, held it in her palm, and then slid it onto her own finger with slow, deliberate care. I've never been asked for my whole self, she said. Not like this. I'm not asking for anything you don't choose to give. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. Then it's yes. It's always been yes. They married 2 weeks later, beneath that same ash tree with Roy standing off to the side as witness. Quinn carved a wooden box to hold their shared things, letters, bits of thread, a dried blossom from the ridge where the mare had foaled. Roy moved on soon after, having traded his labor for a bay mule and a coat that didn't hang in tatters. Before he left, he handed Sienna a folded scrap of paper. Just in case you're ever near Fort Bridger. My sister's there. She's got a good heart, and she owes me a favor. Sienna tucked the paper into the wooden box. That summer the garden gave more than they needed, and they traded extra beans in town for flour and salt. Sienna began to sew again, not just mending, but new shirts, quilts, and a red muslin dress she wore on the first cool day of September, when Quinn took her hand and led her down to the creek just to watch the leaves change. He didn't speak much that afternoon. He didn't need to. She lay beside him on the bank, the smell of dry grass and water thick in the still air, and they watched the world turn gold around them. That winter, they filled the cabin with the smell of pine and smoke, dried apples strung along the rafters. They read by lantern light, her voice soft as she stitched, his hand resting over hers when she paused. And when spring came again, it wasn't with the sharp edge of survival, but with the steady bloom of something enduring, a life neither of them had expected, but one they'd chosen, piece by piece, hand in hand. They never needed to speak of what came before. It lived in the quiet, in the way Quinn always left room beside him, in the way Sienna touched each new morning like a gift. Years later, travelers passing through would sometimes ask how they came to that cabin, how it had become so full of warmth and steady light. Quinn would always nod toward the garden, and Sienna would smile without answering, one hand resting over the silver ring that had never left her finger. And that was enough.